Dear class, welcome to State and Local Government. Today we're looking at state, local, and federal government budgeting. But technically, we're really interested in how states and local government budget themselves. But as you know, we are in the era in which the federal government provides a lot of funding, and so we have to talk about all three. We had 4 readings. I will discuss 3 here. Each of these were very difficult. I think 1 or 2 were easy to understand compared to the others, but they became more and more technical. There was a lot of econometric work, and I don't expect students at the undergraduate level to understand these things. And so, whatever you understood, I would say go back and read it another time. In the Demetrius and Bright paper, we're looking at who is in charge when it comes to state budgeting. Is it the governor's office? Is it the state legislature? So this was the main concern. And they start the paper by saying, look, the existing literature says that whoever is in charge of budgeting is actually running the place. So who has more power? So they looked at existing or prior literature about this. And they suggest that it seems as though the state legislatures are becoming more powerful while the governor is losing out. So they look at Abney and Loth, they look at um, Goodman 2007, and each of these guys are suggesting that state legislature is becoming more powerful, and they kind of offer examples of why the governor might become less powerful. But really, it comes down to resources. That was the main one. If you look here in the 1980s, we have the Reagan administration making large block grants without conditions to states. And this would have increased resources to hire staff who would be very good at mathematical analysis and accounting and just free up the time of these legislators, right? And so these legislators are elected officials, but many of them cannot understand a budget and are not experts on accounting. And so the mathematical aspect of it, the accounting aspect of it, just goes over their head. They might be better at law. They might be better at other aspects. And so now they could finally hire people. And in the 1960s, state legislators just didn't have this kind of money. And so they came off as less organized, not ready to really analyze what was in the budget, not really able to read thousands of pages of policy and budgeting and all of that, right? So this is essentially what the paper was about. One item they talked about is the line item veto, which is a special power of the governor's office when it came to budgeting. So whatever the state legislature proposed, the governor could use the line item veto and simply cut out anything that they did not like. So this is a very powerful way that the governor exercises power over any form of bill, any form of legislation. So they also looked at other kinds of scholarship. One of the things they suggest is that, look, the governor is important, is held responsible for the economy, and so holds the purse. So basically, the governor is the person we will blame if a state government is not run properly. And therefore, the state legislature tends to give up power to the governor. So it has become a ceremonial practice, so to say. And they also look at if the state legislature is united, that is, it's dominated by one party or the other, it will have a ability to work in a certain way, whereas if it's divided among parties, then this influence is low. So Demetrius themselves look at 50 states except for, oh no, they do look at 50 states. However, they ask questions to state legislature staff about who is more effective. They also look at different kinds of studies that were already done, such as the American State Administrators Project, which actually looks at the 50 states, not Demetrius. And then if you look at table 1 on page 5, Demetrius and Wright, they choose particular years. So 1978 is a year in which federal government spending actually tanked, it bottomed, and so did money to state and local governments. There was too much debt from Vietnam, Korea, World War II, all of that, the Cold War spending. And so the government decided to reduce its funding to altogether to states, local governments, but also on defense and other issues. But then the Reagan administration increased spending again from 1980s, mostly because it decided to outspend USSR during the Cold War. And after 1988, George Bush Sr. came to power as president and tried to reduce inflation and so cut back on government spending. So why 1960s? Why did the research begin on this issue in the 1960s? So as mentioned, 1960s is basically a year in which government spending, federal government spending rose astronomically. Most of it went to Medicaid, Medicare, and there was also the idea of Social Security expansion. So as we learned earlier in 1935, Social Security Act was passed. However, it did not include anything for health insurance. So we see in 1960s a major increase, but there's also other kinds of funding. With that came the need for oversight. If the government is indeed spending so much money and giving this money to the state and local, it wanted to have accountability. And as we know, cooperative federalism begins in 1930s, but actual level of spending to state and local was very little. Let's look at Leslie McCranahan. This paper is from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, and it's based on the 80s and 90s. Main question here is to balance the federal budget or not. So this was a big question in the 1990s. And if you were here in 1965, apparently the issue is like, much older. And essentially, it's a Republican, uh, a Republican, what do you call it? A policy agenda, or rather, this is how they are running during election year. They're saying we're going to balance the budget. The federal budget is out of whack. If states can do it, why can't they? So how does a bill become an act or law? A bill needs to get 2/3 vote in each house, whether it's the House of Representatives or the Senate, and then it moves to the other house and has to get a 2/3 vote there as well. After that, the president signs the bill or vetoes it, in which case it goes back for a vote to Congress, If Congress votes yes, then it passes. So states do it, why can't federal budgets? So proponents of balancing the federal budget argue that, look, states and local budgets are always balanced. Balancing the budget actually is written into these state constitutions. And this has to do with the history of the US, and you will find that out when you read In a Bad State.